Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's Wild West tale, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts on how you'd handle this cowboy situation, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that's full of suspense, action, and heart. Now, saddle up and let's ride into the untamed plains. The sun hung low over the rolling hills, painting the ranch in streaks of gold and amber. Dust swirled lazily in the wind, carrying the familiar scent of dry earth, hay, and leather. At the edge of the pasture, a solitary figure moved with steady purpose. His boots kicked up small clouds of dirt as he checked the fences, his withered hands running along the rough wood with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Life had been quiet for him these past few years, each day stretching like the endless horizon, predictable, safe, and comforting in its routine. He was a man molded by solitude. Deep lines etched into his sun-beaten face told tales of hardship and survival, eyes the color of steel revealing a mind that had seen too much but still carried a quiet steadiness. The ranch was both his refuge and his prison. He spoke to no one beyond the occasional passing traveler or the wandering cattle herder, preferring the company of his horses, the whispering wind, and the endless expanse of sky above. The quiet suited him, and he had grown accustomed to the rhythm of a life dictated by the land, the animals, and the slow passage of the sun. That evening, he returned to the small wooden cabin at the heart of the ranch, his boots thudding against the creaking floorboards. A fire was already glowing in the hearth, the smoke curling into the twilight air. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat, listening to the distant howl of coyotes, a sound that had once been alarming but now was nothing more than background music to his solitude. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of leaves, was a familiar note in the symphony of his life. The peace was shattered just as the sky turned a bruised shade of violet. A sudden knock at the cabin door made him stiffen, every muscle alert. Visitors were rare, and at this hour, even rarer. He approached cautiously, hand resting near the worn handle of his revolver. When he opened the door, two figures appeared against the fading light, small, hesitant, and drenched from a sudden spring rain that had swept across the plains. They were girls, no older than 16 or 17, their clothes soaked and clinging, hair plastered to their faces. Their eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, scanning the ranch as though expecting predators to leap from the shadows. The taller of the two spoke first, voice trembling but resolute. "Please, sir, can we stay here? Just for tonight?" Her words were simple, yet carried the weight of desperation. He steadied them, noting their wary stance, the subtle tension in their shoulders. The life he had built was quiet for a reason, and strangers, especially ones carrying such urgent pleas, were not to be trusted lightly. But there was something about them, something fragile yet undeniably brave. Against his better judgment, compassion nudged him forward. "You can come in," he said, keeping his voice even. "But don't try anything foolish." They stepped inside, shivering, eyes darting around the cabin with cautious curiosity. He guided them to a small corner near the fire, fetching dry blankets and gesturing for them to warm themselves. Silence filled the room as they wrapped the fabric around their shoulders, the crackling flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. For a moment, it seemed the world outside did not exist, just the warmth of the hearth and the quiet tension that hung between them. The cowboy broke the silence. "You're far from home," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "What brings you out here in this weather?" The shorter girl, with wide, dark eyes, hesitated. Her fingers twisted the hem of her wet shirt as she replied, We had no choice. They were coming, after us. We didn't know where to go." She swallowed, voice catching on the words she didn't want to speak aloud. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. The plains were vast, but danger moved quickly across them. Bandits, rival groups, and worse still, the scars of past conflicts, made life unpredictable. He had chosen this isolation to avoid exactly this kind of intrusion, yet here they were, standing in his cabin, fragile as they might seem, demanding sanctuary. Night deepened outside, stars blinking into existence, and the wind carried the sound of distant hooves. The cowboy tended to the fire, quietly measuring his options. Shelter them and risk inviting unknown peril, or turn them away and abandon them to the night. He had lived his life on principle: protect those who could not protect themselves, even if it meant facing danger head-on. By the time the first tendrils of dawn threatened the horizon, a silent understanding had settled between them. The girls huddled close, exhaustion heavy in their bones, and he sat across the room, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the window. A storm was brewing, and not just the one in the sky. Shadows were moving in the distance, whispers of trouble that would not wait. Yet, for this night, the cabin was a haven. And in that fragile peace, the cowboy felt something he hadn't felt in years, an echo of purpose beyond solitude, a tether to a world he had long avoided. Outside, the prairie slept under a blanket of mist, but inside, the air was charged with unspoken questions, and the promise that the coming days would test them all in ways they could not yet imagine. The morning sun spilled through the cabin window, casting long slivers of gold across the wooden floorboards. The air smelled of damp earth and lingering smoke from the night's fire. The girls moved quietly, each action measured, as though even the simplest gesture might draw danger. The cowboy watched from his chair, silent, noting every flicker of emotion in their eyes, every nervous shift of weight. Their presence had already unsettled the rhythm of his life, yet he felt the pull of responsibility too strong to ignore. Breakfast was a sparse affair: coffee for him, warm water for them, bread torn from the loaf on the counter. Conversation stumbled at first, words heavy with caution. The taller girl, her dark hair still damp from the previous night, glanced at him and said softly, "We don't mean trouble. We just need a safe place." The cowboy nodded, studying her expression. He recognized fear. It was etched into the lines of her face, but also a resilience he had rarely seen. It reminded him uncomfortably of the world he had once known, the one he had tried to leave behind. The shorter girl, quieter, picked at her fingers, eyes downcast. Occasionally, she lifted her gaze to glance at the cowboy, as though measuring him for trust. He understood the calculation. Life had taught him that trust was currency, and it was always paid in full, often with danger attached. "You can stay," he said finally, voice steady. "But you follow the rules here. You do as I say, nothing more, nothing less." The girls nodded in unison, relief flickering across their faces, though it quickly vanished as the weight of unsaid truths settled between them. The morning passed with small tasks: repairing a fence, tending to the horses, fetching water from the nearby stream. The cowboy worked efficiently, and the girls shadowed him, cautious but willing to help. There were moments of tension: a startled horse, a dropped tool, a misunderstanding of directions, but they were minor, fleeting, and the cowboy let them slide. He noticed how they moved with a practiced awareness, their eyes scanning the surroundings, ears attuned to every sound. They were survivors, he realized, not children lost, but skilled in ways they had yet to reveal. As they worked, snippets of conversation emerged. The taller girl spoke of the land they had traveled through, of hidden paths and secret watering holes. The cowboy's brow furrowed. "You know these plains better than most men," he remarked. She shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "We had to. They didn't leave us a choice." The weight behind her words was clear, but she offered nothing further. The shorter girl stayed quiet, yet he could sense her internal struggle, the urge to speak shadowed by fear. By midday, the sky had turned a harsh blue, the sun glaring down on the ranch with unrelenting intensity. From the ridge beyond the corral, the cowboy spotted tracks, footprints, fresh and hurried, leading toward the tree line at the edge of his property. He stiffened, his mind alert. He didn't recognize the shapes immediately, but the urgency embedded in them was unmistakable. The girls noticed his change in demeanor and exchanged quick, nervous glances. "They're close," the taller girl whispered, voice low, tense. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "Who's close?" She hesitated, then shook her head, the words trapped somewhere between caution and necessity. He said nothing, simply moved toward the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon. The tracks led to the edge of the property, disappearing into the shadows of the scattered trees. There was no immediate danger in sight, yet the air carried a warning, a tension that pressed against his chest. Afternoon slipped into evening, but the atmosphere on the ranch had shifted. The girls no longer moved casually, each step was deliberate, each glance alert. The cowboy, too, felt the quiet intrusion of unease. He wondered about the forces that pursued them, about what they had fled from, and why fate had dropped them at his door. He didn't ask directly. Some things, he knew, had to be revealed on their own. Instead, he worked, repairing a fence, sharpening tools, tending to the horses, all while listening, watching, and calculating. When night fell, the wind carried a chill, and the cabin's shadows stretched long and restless. The girls sat close to the fire, their knees drawn up, voices low. "We shouldn't have come this far," the shorter one murmured. "They'll find us here." The cowboy leaned against the doorframe, silent, letting their words hang. He had expected that acknowledgement, though he didn't fully understand who they were. Still, the danger was real. The tracks and the girl's fear were evidence enough. He moved to stoke the fire, tossing another log onto the flames. Sparks leapt and danced in the dim light, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. This quiet ranch, which had been his sanctuary, now teetered on the brink of chaos. Yet, in their presence, he felt something unfamiliar but undeniable, a connection, a reason to act beyond self-preservation. These girls were now a part of his world, whether he wanted it or not. The night deepened, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying hints of movement far off in the darkness. Shadows of uncertainty pressed against the edges of the cabin, promising trials and questions that could not be ignored. The cowboy sat with the girls, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder what lay ahead. Trust, he realized, was not freely given. It was earned through action, courage, and the willingness to confront danger without flinching. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the air was thick with anticipation. Outside, the plain stretched endless, beautiful and perilous, but within the cabin, a fragile alliance had formed. The girls rested, weary but watchful, and the cowboy remained alert, aware that the quiet of the ranch was no longer permanent. The coming days would demand decisions, bravery, and perhaps sacrifices he had not anticipated. The peace he had known was gone, replaced by something sharper, more urgent, a storm approaching on the horizon, one that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of resolve he possessed. The first light of dawn stretched over the prairie, casting long shadows across the ranch. The air was thick with tension, a quiet that pressed against the cabin walls and into the cowboy's bones. He had sensed it all night, the subtle shift of wind, the distant echo of hooves, and now the threat had arrived in earnest. From the ridge beyond the corral, a group of men emerged, their horses kicking up clouds of dust, guns glinting in the weak sunlight. The girls stiffened, eyes wide, fear etched into their faces, but the cowboy felt no hesitation. Years of solitude had honed his instincts. Danger was no longer abstract, it was tangible, and it demanded action. He stepped outside, revolver at his hip, eyes scanning each approaching figure. His body moved with quiet precision, every muscle coiled, ready. The taller girl instinctively ducked behind the cabin, glancing at him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The shorter one stayed close to the door, trembling but resolute. They had trusted him, and he would honor that trust. "Stay inside," he commanded, voice low but firm. "Don't move unless I say." They nodded, their hands gripping the wooden frame, knuckles white. The bandits circled the property, their intentions clear. They underestimated the ranch, the cowboy, and the quiet strength that had kept him alive all these years. He allowed them to advance, watching their formation, memorizing each movement, knowing that one misstep could cost lives. When the first shot rang out, it was a warning, a crack of defiance that shattered the morning calm. The cowboy responded with calculated precision, returning fire from behind the natural cover of the cabin and fence posts. Dust and splinters flew as bullets tore through wood and soil alike. Inside, the girls listened, hearts pounding, but their fear was mingled with admiration. The taller girl's hands tightened around a small bundle she had kept hidden, a token from her past that represented the peril they had fled. The shorter one whispered prayers under her breath, every word a plea for survival, for the man who had given them shelter. They realized that courage wasn't only about confronting the enemy, it was about standing together, trusting one another even when the odds were insurmountable. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in a tense blur. The cowboy moved with fluid efficiency, guiding the girls' actions through subtle gestures, instructing them when to stay low, when to move silently, when to provide cover. He was no longer the solitary man who had lived for himself. He had become a protector, a mentor, a figure whose experience and moral compass were now inseparable from their fate. Every decision carried weight, every glance carried meaning. The tide turned when the girls, revealing their hidden resourcefulness, aided him in unexpected ways. The taller girl had a keen eye for terrain and led a small diversion, luring a portion of the attackers away through a narrow ravine. The shorter girl, silent and observant, found a vantage point and called out warnings, allowing the cowboy to anticipate each move. Their combined ingenuity, paired with his expertise, turned the battle into a calculated dance, a deadly game of strategy and courage. Amidst the chaos, the cowboy felt a surge of something long dormant, hope. Not blind optimism, but a certainty born of skill, trust, and shared purpose. He realized that these girls were more than survivors, they were catalysts, pushing him beyond the boundaries of solitude into action and connection. The enemy faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks, as the cowboy exploited every weakness, every misstep. One by one, the bandits were neutralized, disarmed, or driven back, their confidence shattered against a force they had underestimated. As the final horseman retreated, the prairie fell silent once more. The smoke from spent gunpowder mingled with the morning mist, curling in ghostly tendrils above the earth. The cowboy lowered his weapon, breathing heavily, sweat and grime streaking his face. The girls emerged cautiously from the cabin, eyes wide, voices trembling with relief and wonder. He allowed himself a rare, brief smile, a recognition of the bond forged in fire, in fear, and in the unspoken promise of protection. They moved to the cabin together, the danger past but the lessons etched deeply. The taller girl placed her hand on the cowboy's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of courage, skill, and honor. The shorter one reached for the bundle she had kept close, sharing a story of family, of enemies, and of the journey that had brought them here. The cowboy listened, absorbing every word, understanding that their survival was not solely his doing, but the product of shared trust and mutual resilience. Night fell over the ranch, serene yet forever altered. The stars blinked into existence, indifferent to the trials below, yet they witnessed the transformation. The cowboy, once defined by solitude, now recognized the power of connection. The girls, once fugitives fleeing a world of danger, had found a refuge and a mentor. Each had changed, each had grown, and each carried the memory of the day that had tested their limits and revealed their strength. By dawn, the ranch returned to a semblance of calm. Horses grazed in the quiet pasture, the wind whispered softly across the plains, and the cabin, scarred by battle but standing resolute, bore silent testimony to the courage within. The cowboy stood at the edge of the porch, watching the horizon, eyes reflecting the resilience he had witnessed in two young girls. He knew the world beyond the ranch remained wild and unforgiving, yet here, for a fleeting moment, they had carved a sanctuary together, a place of honor, trust, and unexpected kinship. And as the sun rose, painting the prairie with hues of fire and gold, the cowboy realized that life's greatest victories were not found in solitude, nor in the absence of danger, but in the courage to face it, side by side with those who dared to trust him. The journey ahead would be uncertain, but he was no longer alone, and the girls were no longer simply seeking refuge. They were partners in a life shaped by resilience, bravery, and the unyielding will to survive.